Chicago traded Angel Reese for a bag of chips and then immediately signed Azura Stevens, Skylar Diggins-Smith, DiJonai Carrington, and traded for Rickea Jackson, all all-stars or all-defensive team caliber players. That's not a rebuild, that's a jailbreak. Reese's fans are online demanding her jersey gets retired by a team that gave her number away within weeks of the trade. And Reese herself has now responded publicly, and what she said about Chicago is the most unhinged thing you'll hear all offseason. We'll get to that, but first you need to understand exactly what went down inside that Chicago Sky locker room and why Reese is furious that the team is erasing her from their history. How long do you think will Reese last in the WNBA? Let me know down in the comments below.
It is pretty clear. Chicago Sky as an organization and as management and as a coaching staff said, we are not putting more money into this team. We are not building this team around Angel Reese.
Reese came into Chicago in 2024 off an LSU national championship run the year prior, and the Sky handed her a starting spot and a full marketing push almost from day one. So you'd think she would have come in with some humility, right? She didn't. The friction that started building inside that locker room wasn't about playing time or her contract. It was about how she treated the people who were already there when she arrived.
In case you have not been paying attention, the Chicago Sky are on a mission right now. They are on a mission, and frankly, it's hilarious. And what is even more hilarious is the fact that some of these players that Angel Reese drowned, the Chicago Sky are starting to re-sign.
Courtney Vandersloot tore her ACL during the 2025 season. And that's the kind of injury where teammates usually keep things internal, say supportive stuff publicly, and move on. Reese went to the Chicago Tribune instead and said, "We can't rely on Courtney to come back at that age that she's at. We need someone probably a little younger with some experience." She basically called one of the most respected players in franchise history old and finished, out loud, to a reporter, while Vandersloot was still rehabbing.
"We can't rely on Courtney to come back at that age that she's at," Reese said. "I know she'll be a great asset for us, but we can't rely on that. We need someone probably a little younger with some experience, somebody who's been playing the game and is willing to compete for a championship and has done it before." Courtney Vandersloot, by the way, two-time WNBA champion, five-time All-Star, two-time All-WNBA first team, left the New York Liberty, a championship caliber team, to come help out the Chicago. Oh, damn. Oh, damn. Oh, dang. Oh, dang. It's all right, Courtney.
In a locker room, you don't recover from that. The other players heard it. The coaching staff heard it. Everyone heard it. And then there's the injury stuff with Reese herself. Insiders started telling reporters that teammates and coaches had noticed a pattern where Reese would go down or sit out at convenient moments and then turn up completely fine when the cameras were pointed at her. This wasn't whispered behind closed doors either, because by the time these stories circulated, people inside the organization were clearly done protecting her. Then the season ended and Reese missed the final 3 games with a back injury, which would be completely unremarkable except that footage surfaced of her twerking on a private jet to Las Vegas around the same time. So make of that what you will. Kamilla Cardoso, the Sky's starting center and the most important long-term player on that roster, reportedly walked out on Reese at some point during the season. When your center gets so fed up she physically removes herself from the situation, that's not a personality clash. That's a verdict on a person.
The worst part about this Kamilla Cardoso last night is you seeing her visibly giving up on her team here. Look at this. Look at this. Kamilla Cardoso literally walking towards the New York Liberty bench. Walking towards the New York Liberty bench. Like, hey, Brianna, Sabrina, scoot over a little bit. Let me take a seat. Hey, Sandy, is there any room on the bench for me? Can you guys use an extra player? Can I switch jerseys and see how I fit on this team?
The Sky suspended Reese in September 2025 for conduct detrimental to the team, which is about as nuclear as a franchise gets with one of their own marketed players. And this wasn't a snap decision either, because the organization had clearly been documenting problems for months before they pulled that trigger. Reese's response was to tell the Tribune she might have to move in a different direction and do what's best for me. which is a pretty bold ultimatum from a player whose team just suspended her.
Damn! An Angel Reese hit piece. This Angel Reese article, published by Yahoo Sports, didn't hold back one bit. From the get-go, it was on sight, it seems. Exposing the organization, couldn't stand her. Locker room cancer. The locker room now doing backflips that Angel Reese is gone. The whole double-double debacle.
After the trade went through, sources inside the Sky organization started talking, and the word that kept appearing in every single account was relief. One insider told reporters there had been so much apprehension between the team and her, and that everyone was happy they didn't have to deal with her controversies anymore. Another source flat out called her a locker room cancer. These weren't strangers speculating from the outside. These were people inside the building who watched 2 full years of this play out up close, and not one of them described losing Reese as a loss.
Reese's contributions are all about making Reese look better on the stat sheet, not making her teammates better. Having 2 first-round draft picks for the next 2 years, however, a franchise can go ahead and create a formidable starting squad if you play your cards right. But even more of a benefit is the fact that, according to some reports, Sky players are thrilled that Reese is gone, making it pretty obvious she was viewed as a locker room cancer.
2 future first-round picks and a second-round swap. That's what Chicago got for a 23-year-old 2-time All-Star who led the league in rebounding both of her first 2 seasons. One source called it getting her for a bag of Cheetos, which is funny but also basically accurate, because in WNBA draft terms, 2 late firsts projected to land around picks 12 through 15 is roughly what you'd expect to pay for a solid role player, not a Nike-sponsored double-double machine. And the thing that makes this genuinely wild is that Reese didn't ask to leave. Multiple reports confirmed Chicago initiated this trade, meaning the front office went looking for a taker, got offered this return, and said yes. So they weren't reacting to a trade demand or trying to squeeze value out of a player who wanted out. They went shopping for someone to take her off their hands and accepted what was essentially pennies on the dollar because they wanted her gone fast.
Since they drafted Angel Reese, all of a sudden, the Bravado struggled to win games. And ESPN expects me to believe that the organization is the problem here? Either way, I don't think basketball had anything to do with why Angel Reese was traded. I think Angel Reese was traded because the Bravado thought that she was more trouble than she's worth.
So why would a front office do that? Because the picks were almost beside the point. Chicago wasn't selling a basketball player, they were buying back their own locker room. And you can't put a draft slot number on a roster that actually wants to practice together and show up for each other. The source who spoke to reporters about this didn't mince words either. The Chicago Sky said, "We just don't want to deal with the headache. We don't care. We don't want her here. She's been a locker room cancer from the jump." That's not a negotiating position. That's a verdict. There's also the contract math sitting underneath all of this. Reese's rookie deal was expiring, and a max-level extension was coming up fast. So Chicago was staring down a choice between committing serious long-term money to a player who'd fractured her own locker room or moving her while there were still assets to collect. When you frame it that way, 2 late firsts and a swap starts to look less like a lowball and more like a calculated exit.
Sky players reportedly sick of Angel Reese as locker room relief hits after the trade. The blockbuster trade ends Reese's 2-season tenure with the Sky, during which she established herself as one of the league's top rebounders and earned All-Star honors in both years. While Reese quickly embraced her new chapter, celebrating on social media and stepping out in public with a new hairstyle, an anonymous source close to the Chicago organization claims the move has brought significant relief inside their locker room.
Atlanta took the deal because they saw a discount on a player with all-star stats and decided the locker room reputation was a Chicago-specific problem. Whether that's true is something they're going to find out pretty quickly, especially once training camp starts and the Dream have to actually integrate Reese into a roster that already has its own chemistry and offensive structure. Meanwhile, the moment the trade cleared, Skylar Diggins-Smith chose Chicago. then Azura Stevens, then DiJonai Carrington, then Rickea Jackson arrived via trade. Players around the league watched what happened and decided the building was worth signing with. And that's not a coincidence. Free agents don't flock to a franchise that just made a bad deal. They flock to one that just made the right call.
Are the Chicago Sky about to win twice as many games as they won last year? Are they sneaky a playoff team right now? With some of these signings that they made? Skylar Diggins, folks. Skylar Diggins. That's a hell of a player.
Most franchises go quiet after a messy split. They let the dust settle, maybe keep the number out of circulation for a year, put out a bland press release thanking the player for her contributions. Chicago didn't do any of that. And the speed of what they built in Reese's absence tells you everything about how badly they wanted her gone. Within weeks of the trade clearing, the Sky signed Skylar Diggins-Smith, a former all-star point guard who had options across the league and chose Chicago anyway. Then Azura Stevens, a versatile big who can actually step out and shoot, which matters enormously because it gives Kamilla Cardoso room to operate down low without two bigs clogging the same paint. Then DiJonai Carrington, who is one of the most disruptive perimeter defenders in the entire league, the kind of player who changes a game's energy before she scores a single point. Rickea Jackson arrived via trade. So in one offseason, Chicago went from a team that couldn't keep their own locker room intact to a team that free agents were actively choosing. That's not a coincidence. Players around the league watched the Reese situation play out and decided the building was worth signing with once it was over.
You know, the dynasty starts after you, not with you. Chicago Sky to Angel Reese. Woo-wee! I told you that AR disease ran deep. Nobody wanted to play with that. That is wild.
And then there's the jersey number. Reese wore number 5 in Chicago, and the Sky gave it to Rickea Jackson less than a week after the trade closed. No ceremony, no cooling off period, no, we'll keep it out of circulation out of respect. They handed it to a player they'd just traded for and moved on like the previous 2 seasons didn't need any kind of acknowledgement. Reese's fans absolutely lost it online over this, with some of them genuinely demanding the Sky retire the number of a player who got traded after 2 seasons and 1 suspension. To be clear, jersey retirement is for franchise cornerstones, for players who spent a decade or more building something in a city, not for a player whose own teammates were publicly calling her a locker room cancer by the time the trade went through. The gap between what Reese's fans thought her status was in Chicago and what Chicago's front office actually thought her status was is almost funny when you put those two things side by side.
Angel Reese's fans not too happy about the jersey number. This was Rickea Jackson's jersey in high school, so she's familiar with the number 5. Man, Flage's mama said Angel slow, and her fans just as slow as her. Came in and stole that. Damn. The slow. Retire 5. She might come back once Sloot leaves. Folks, you see all the moves that the Chicago Sky are making now that Angel Reese said bye, bye, bye.
Giving number 5 to Jackson wasn't just a roster move. It was the organization communicating, through the most visible symbol available, that the Reese era wasn't a chapter worth preserving. Chicago basically built the kind of team Reese had publicly complained they should be building, with spacing, defensive intensity, and veterans who know how to win. And they did it the week after getting rid of her. Diggins-Smith alone changes how opposing defenses have to guard Chicago's entire offense, because you simply can't ignore her on the perimeter the way teams could when Reese was the second option. Atlanta's plan for 2026 is to swap Brittany Griner for Angel Reese and run the same roster back. That's genuinely it. The dream got bounced in the first round of the 2025 playoffs by an Indiana Fever team that was missing multiple players due to injury, including Caitlin Clark sitting out with a groin injury for part of that series. And Atlanta's front office looked at that result and decided what they really needed was a paint-clogging rebounder with a documented locker room problem.
The Atlanta Dream now look like a team on paper with Ryan Howard, with Alicia Gray, with Brittany Griner, and now the league's top rebounder added to their roster. Atlanta should, and I think they won. I think they went 30-14 last season. Atlanta should be a title contender, although I'm very suspicious because I think Angel Reese is a poison and a toxin that has been added to that locker room.
Allisha Gray can score, and Ryan Howard is a legitimate offensive weapon. So the Dream weren't a bad team exactly. But a first-round exit against a shorthanded Fever squad tells you everything about how far Atlanta actually is from contending. Adding Reese doesn't close that gap because Reese shot 18% from 3 in 2025, meaning defenses can just sag off her completely, pack the paint, and dare her to beat them from the perimeter. She won't. Her entire game runs on offensive rebounds and putbacks, which is genuinely useful, but it doesn't create a new shot for Gray or Howard, and it doesn't open up driving lanes either. Brianna Jones is also still on this roster, so Atlanta is now running Reese and Jones together in a front court where neither player can step out and shoot, and opposing defenses don't have to guard either of them beyond about 8 feet from the basket. Gray and Howard need room to operate, and now they've got two bigs eating up the exact space they need to get downhill. Griner, for all her limitations at this stage of her career, at least brought some post versatility and a different kind of offensive threat. Reese doesn't bring that. She brings volume rebounding and a reputation that Chicago's entire organization was relieved to ship out.
But this would be my advice to those young ladies that you mentioned, right, on that new Atlanta team of hers. Get ready to stick your hands out like this and never get the ball. Because she's going to get the rebound, get another rebound, get another rebound, another rebound, and another me-bound. And there's going to be, I'm fascinated by this in this sense. And Scap, I'm going to watch some highlight clips of Atlanta starting this season. I'm going to watch the body language of those teammates when that happens.
Compare that to what Indiana is building around Caitlin Clark. Lexi Hull spaces the floor and defends. Aaliyah Boston is a skilled post player who doesn't need the ball in isolation to be effective. Kelsey Mitchell and Sophie Cunningham both move without the ball and fit around Clark's game without creating conflicts. Nobody on that roster is demanding touches in positions that step on what Clark does best. And that's not accidental roster construction. That's what a front office looks like when it actually understands how its best player operates. Atlanta gave up 2 first-round picks for a player who shoots 18% from 3, and whose last team was so desperate to move her, they accepted what one source called a bag of Cheetos in return. Those picks will eventually land back in Chicago's hands, so the Dream are essentially funding the Sky's rebuild while absorbing all the locker room risk themselves, and Chicago gets to watch that unfold from a much more comfortable position.
I think, Angel Reese, listen and listen clear. You better take full advantage of this opportunity with the Atlanta Dream. Okay, you are playing with Ryan Howard and Allisha Gray. They are all stars, 20-point per game scores. All you have to do is be the role player that you were born to be.
So after the suspension, after her teammates went on record calling her a locker room cancer, after Chicago handed her number to Rickea Jackson without so much as a pause, Reese went public with her response. And she called herself the real Chicago GOAT. Not a great player, not someone who gave everything she had for 2 seasons. The GOAT. The greatest of all time for a franchise she got traded away from for 2 late first-round picks and a second-round swap, after 1 suspension and 2 years of drama that her own teammates couldn't wait to talk about the moment she was gone. The confidence required to say that out loud after all of that is genuinely something.
Now that Angel is gone, the players want to go there. Getting ugly. It's getting ugly. It's getting late early, as they say. I told you they got rid of the disease. Angel Reese, now Chicago, moving in the right direction.
GOATs don't usually get traded for what one source described as a bag of Cheetos. That's just not how franchise legends work anywhere in professional sports. Michael Jordan didn't get shipped out for a second-round swap. Diana Taurasi didn't get moved because her locker room couldn't stand her. When a franchise actually views a player as their greatest ever, they don't give her number away within a week of the trade and then sign 4 high-profile players without her before the offseason is even halfway done. Chicago did all of that, fast and without looking back once. Reese isn't furious because the Sky moved on. Plenty of players get traded and handle it fine. She's furious because Chicago moved on so fast, so publicly, and so successfully that the message is impossible to misread. Diggins-Smith, Stevens, Carrington, Jackson, all of them chose or landed in Chicago after Reese left, and the roster the Sky built in one offseason looks nothing like the team Reese was a part of. That's not a rebuild. That's a franchise exhaling.
They traded away Angel Reese and then said, we're going in. We're going in. Right here, right now. Had to get her off the team to get these players to come here.
The GOAT comment lands differently when you put it next to what Chicago actually did. Reese clearly felt like the Sky needed her, like the organization would feel her absence and slow down, and instead, they accelerated. Number 5 went to Jackson before most fans even processed that the trade had happened, and the free agent started arriving almost immediately after that. So when Reese calls herself the Chicago GOAT, she's not just overstating her legacy, she's revealing that the erasure genuinely got to her, and that she expected Chicago to feel it the way she's feeling it. The 2026 WNBA season is taking shape around a pretty clear divide. Indiana built spacing, shooting, and roster harmony around Caitlin Clark, with players like Lexi Hull, Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, and Sophie Cunningham fitting around her game without creating conflicts, and that roster is trending upward in a way that's hard to argue with. Chicago rebuilt fast with players who chose to be there. And Atlanta is running back the roster that lost to a shorthanded Fever squad in the first round, now with Reese in the paint instead of Griner, 2 fewer draft picks, and all of the locker room risk Chicago just spent an entire offseason trying to escape. Reese will spend 2026 trying to prove Chicago wrong in an Atlanta uniform. Chicago will spend 2026 with Reese's old number on a different player's back, and those 2 first-round picks from Atlanta rolling in right on schedule. How long do you think will Reese last in the WNBA? Let me know down in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss out. Click the video on the screen, and we will see you in the next one.